Okay, so 3 minutes in, so maybe we'll just get started since we have a bunch of stuff to talk about today. And then we'll kind of see who else trickles in. So welcome everybody to this month's governance call. So we have a couple things on the agenda today. A reminder, if you have questions or if you want to speak, again, since we're doing the Discord chat, just maybe post your question in the meetings chat or unmute respectfully. So what we're going to be chatting about today is we're going to be giving, obviously, an update on some of the governance proposals, some of the updates from the governance team on some of the initiatives that we're working on, and then get an update on the Radicle Grants Program and the Ecosystem Growth Fund, and then give some updates from the transition. Specifically, Shelby is going to be giving a quick presentation on the changing governance needs in context of the transition to the DAO. So this is going to be like a really good opportunity for people who kind of want to start understanding how governance itself is actually going to change in this transition, to listen in for Shelby's presentation towards the end of the call. She's going to be walking us through a lot of our latest thinking there. So I'll kick it off with just some quick updates from what's been happening on the forum. So some updates on past proposals that have been passed before this last month, but the first is the phase 0 of the transition to the DAO, is that, as I'm sure everybody has seen, but we've passed a proposal for distributing token incentive packages to current Radicle contributors, and so that proposal should be activated, if you will, by the end of the month. Which is really great and represents like a big first step in this transition and the distribution of ownership workstream. And then we have the still to be announced Gitcoin Public Goods Alliance. Gitcoin has been super busy with the launch of their Grants V2 product, and so we've actually pushed the launch a little bit, but we're currently working on creating an announcement together. So we should be kind of speaking more publicly about that, and also just creating more structure for, what this alliance is going to do and kind of how we see it evolving over the next couple of months alongside of the Gitcoin DAO ecosystem. We have an open discussion with Enzyme, which the project created temperature check to use Enzyme as like basically a treasury management strategy and team, and so we kind of have an open discussion there, and probably should be seeing something go to formal review within the next couple of weeks based off of some of the open questions we have there from the Enzyme team. But that's also been really great, and that proposal has been in development for a while, so it'll be excited to see where that goes. And then we have 2 outstanding temperature checks that are still being discussed. First is with Otterspace, which is created a temperature check to use Otterspace badges or non-transferable tokens for distributing influence in this transition to the DAO. We'll talk a little bit more about Otterspace and the transition updates, but basically this temperature check is currently being explored in bi-weekly meetings that are discussing the design and potential implementations for testing the Otterspace badges. And so these bi-weekly meetings are basically how our team's getting to know the Otterspace team a little bit more, and starting to figure out how we can start experimenting with the badges within the DAO, which will inform basically where this proposal goes next. So active work there. And then we have the balancer pool temperature check, which has kind of come to a stall as we figure out basically where we want to go with our treasury management strategy as well. So hopefully we'll be able to back up on that temperature check in the coming weeks, as well as we start to activate and put more energy into treasury management itself. So I think that's it from the forum. I think the only other highlight that I'll give is that the grants season 2 is back in play, and so you can kind of check out the grants category on the discourse forum to see all of the exciting new applications that are happening there. So, but I'll pass it off to Shelby to kind of give some more updates from what we're doing on the governance team.
Sure. Thanks, Abby. Also, just FYI, I'm throwing like links as folks mention them into the chat for this channel. So like the ecosystem chat. If you're interested in there, I'll be like creating a little summary of all these links too to share after the call with the recording as well. But if anybody wanted to look into them live, that's where you can find the links. And yes, also, yeah, I hope Boredom joins, because he also will be giving an update on grants, or he wanted to give an update on grants as well. So for governance team updates, just like a few kind of projects we've been working on, one of the main priorities over the last few months have kind of been getting these like a version controlled governance and community docs launched. And this is actually, you can actually look at what we have so far. Please bear in mind that these are not complete, or definitely not like the final drafts, but this is just kind of to get an idea of what that could potentially look like. We believe this is really important to have like proper governance and community documentation alongside of just like regular user documentation for the project. Especially as we transition to the DAO, we want to make sure that these resources are as easy to find as possible, and not just like existing in various locations or Notion pages, is kind of sprawled across our community and Discord. So yeah, this is one really exciting project. I'm excited to get off the ground. The actual like finalization of that will probably take a few more weeks, but if you want to take a look already, it's already looking pretty sweet. Another project that we've kind of been talking about, Abby mentioned it already, is this treasury management discussion. If you've been on these calls the last few months, you've known this has been going on for a while. And it's really tricky to kind of figure out the types of people that, you know, to try to like pull into these calls and to have this discussion, because it is a kind of complicated one. But what we've kind of landed on, or like a plan or path forward for this discussion, is to kind of create like, or have a little workshop with like some internal folks that we think will be really useful to help kind of just like define a strategy, or more of like a philosophy of like values for treasury management that we want to go after in the short and long term. And then yeah, continue discussions with different service providers or tooling that could possibly be used, and also ecosystem experts for guidance. And then eventually forming a working group to help do due diligence and offer analysis on different proposals that have to do with treasury management going forward. Yeah, so that's just a little update on that discussion. Also another tool, interesting tool thing that I've kind of been trying to put together is like a DAO-wide onboarding draft. This is by no means like this is going to be the final thing that we will use, but I thought it would be useful just because I've heard from quite a few people from across the project, and even other projects, of how like the lack of like a clear onboarding process to just get information, or to even like contribute to the project, and to have like clear ideas of what different teams are working on and how to get involved, is really missing in a lot of places. So I thought it would be interesting to like propose a little draft for Radicle to use to onboard new contributors or just interested parties to the project. Also, this governance brainstorming kind of decision mapping thing I've been working on, I'll talk more about that later when I give my presentation. But this has been heavily influenced by Abby and I's involvement in the core development org working group, which is kind of focusing on figuring out how the relationship between different teams will work going forward as we transition to the DAO. So yeah, I'll leave that for now, and I'll pick that up later when I do the presentation. I guess that was all I had for governance team updates for this month. I was going to have Boredom actually give an update on grants after this, but it doesn't look like he's on the call. And neither is Nassar, who was hoping to maybe give a little update on the EGF as well. But I do have, actually, I might have a list.
I can ping them, and if you want to move into your presentation, and then we can see if they join and to give an update.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I had written them. I had like tagged them in a message in the governance updates reminder channel. But that's, yeah, well, that sounds like a good plan. I can already dive in then. Give me 1 second. Figure out the screen sharing. Huh.
Is it not working for you?
I can't seem to get like my, yeah, oh, okay, Boredom's here. Why don't we have Boredom do his update then for grants, and I'll try to figure out what's going on my end.
Are
Great.
you able to hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Boredom.
Okay. Hey, yeah, so a quick update on grants. So yeah, we basically the other week we started season 2. There's kind of two, I'd say, like very interesting projects that we're continuing from that Wonder Space. So we started talking to them this season. We funded them last season. This season, we're working with them on handing out badges to committee members and also grantees. We're going to experiment a few things with sort of distributing the voting workload. So some ideas around that are putting grant applications to a snapshot vote. So essentially, let anyone who has a badge vote on whether or not they like a grant application. And the other project that we're quite keen to continue onwards with is if anyone met Yorgos in the Paris offsite. He's got a team together working on third-party plugins, so focused on IDEs. So we have like 2 different kind of grants that are perpetually going forward, just sort of building new features and adding new grants. And there were 2 things, Shelby, that we talked about the other day, but I think you'd be able to speak to them a bit better.
Oh yeah, just kind of like highlighting, I guess, 2 or one grant application that's already up, and that's having to do with the one from like the community health evaluation from RNDAO. That's I guess like highlighting 2 grants proposals that are more like community governance related, that I thought would be interesting to highlight. And then there's another one that's not actually up yet, so maybe it'd be better to wait to discuss that when it's up. But it's a new, I guess it's like kind of like a new kind of, or like this like community health evaluation, it's kind of like a new kind of grant application. So yeah, just thought it'd be interesting to highlight there.
Cool, that's it for me.
Great. Thanks, Boredom. So yeah, as per usual, you can keep up to date with all the applications in the grants category in the forum. Okay, cool. So I guess Nassar or someone from the EGF still hasn't joined. So maybe Shelby, did you figure out the sharing the screen?
Yeah, I did actually, but I don't know if we want to do like the core dev org and tooling updates first before we do the presentation?
Sure. Yeah. We can totally do that. Okay, cool. So some updates from the general transition to the DAO, our different work streams. So I wanted to just give everybody a quick update on the happenings of the core dev org working group. So as everybody knows, over the last month, Louis spearheaded the creation of the Core Dev Org working group, which is a more open and participatory working group that's focused on submitting and proposing basically an organizational design for the Core Dev Org, which represents the core teams and contributors of the Radicle project. I think Louis is on the call right now, so they can also give an update if they're interested in doing it. But I will just give a little bit on where our head is at now. So I'm actually working on a big transition update as a whole. So I'll be having a bigger timeline that represents kind of like basically all of the different work that's happening among the work streams. Right now we're basically moving into the first and second phase of the org design work stream. I'll try to find the discourse post that I realize I had the Figma up, not the community post. I'll find that after I speak. But basically we're moving into the design phase of our org design work stream. We just had a bunch of different core team DAO planning calls in which we surfaced and discussed the needs of our contributors within the core teams and started setting the stage and pulling more inputs into what will kind of be our first proposal for the organizational design of the core development org. This will include basically our take on what we think the organizational and governance processes should exist for the core development org to kind of do what we'd like it to do. And basically the goal is for us to take a first stab at this proposal and then send it to the community and for contributors for feedback, and then make edits and changes, and then move it into more of like an execution phase. Along in that phase, we'll also be starting to onboard our core teams to different operational tooling that we've been forming relationships with. Shelby can give more an update here in the DAO tooling work stream. But basically, I think people should start expecting more of an active participation and basically and we'll have more information on where this org design is actually going within the next month or so. So yeah, so that's basically the update. I think that this is a little bit preemptive since I'm kind of working on this like larger project transition update that I wanted to share with everybody. So we should have something based on the forum pretty soon regarding that. So I'll let Louis hop in here if they have any questions or in the chat. And if not, I can pass it off to you, Shelby, to talk about the DAO tooling workstream.
I think you summarized it pretty well, but I think the bigger update is coming.
Okay, cool. Great. Well, oh, sorry. Did someone want to say anything? Okay. Cool. Okay. So yeah, just like a few quick updates on like the DAO tooling side. You've kind of heard me talk about DAO tooling in like two different streams before, kind of like operational tooling and then governance tooling. And Abby hinted at this already on the operations tooling side. We've been talking to a few different service providers who kind of focus, I guess, more on the employment and like payroll side that would require more of like a service agreement that would have to be set up more officially. And it's been really interesting talking to them and hearing about the different types of services and possibilities that are available there. And we're working on putting together like a little comparison matrix to share with folks to help them get a better understanding of those different services. And also beyond that, there's still, if you haven't seen it yet, there's always the good old DAO tooling archive that has all of these services listed and goes beyond like just the kind of like three bigger ones we've been talking to. If you're already interested, you can already start like taking a look there. But the goal is to get this summary and comparison matrix put together so that we can share it with contributors so they can start making decisions and having discussions with our teams can start having discussions with their contributors and how they would like to work with the project going forward. And yeah, this will be like a really great big step in the transition for onboarding teams to these new tools and services. So yeah, that's kind of like the main point on the operations tooling timeline. On the governance side, this is something that's going to take a little bit more. It's going to be more of like a collective discussion, or take a little bit more consideration, because it's not something that like a team or individuals can use just by themselves. Like, it's more of it affects the whole DAO, so it needs to kind of include a broader discussion from a wide variety of contributors throughout the DAO. But looking into these tools, there are a few kind of like broader categories or like broader ideas that we think could possibly be useful, and I'll talk about a few of those in my presentation very shortly. And then, yeah, the last update I wanted to just mention on the DAO tooling side, we're actually having we're hosting a demo next Friday on November 18th with the HATS protocol. If you haven't heard of HATS, they are kind of offering like a role, like instead of soul bound, it's more like role bound token contributor badges or roles to kind of help not only like assign roles and like access and power for contributors, but also to kind of empower their organization or organizational structure within different teams and within the DAO. So that, if you're interested, it's kind of similar to OtterSpace. Like, so if you're interested in OtterSpace badges, HATS protocol is kind of like a in that same realm. So yeah, just wanted to mention that. There's already a Discord invite for it. If you go to the events at the top of our Discord server, it's already in there. So yeah, and that's it. I think for the DAO tooling side, for now. If anybody has any questions too about any of these tools, or like would like us to do a demo with any of the tools, please drop a note in the DAO tooling channel under the governance category on our Discord. Does anyone have any questions for any of like the DAO transition stuff or like the workstream stuff? Cool. Okay. Well, then if there are no questions, then maybe I can jump into this presentation. Give me one second.
While you're setting that up, I think I'll just add a couple more notes on like the DAO tooling workstream, and that I think like the focus of, and we're seeing a lot of convergence in the org design workstream and the DAO tooling workstream as we start to figure out what is the best way to introduce these new, very helpful tools that allow for these more crypto-friendly and DAO-friendly operational structures in which core teams will be employing to manage their operations and participate in the core dev working group. We're basically, kind of really thinking about what is the best way to support core teams onboarding to these tools, what's the best way to share educational resources about these tools, and it's something that Shelby's doing like a really great job. And so if you have any questions about like the types of tools that we're talking about, you can really go into this DAO tooling services, DAO tooling and services archive and start clicking around. But we're going to be creating more dedicated materials specifically focused on contributors and helping them guide their onboarding process to these tools as well. So this is like the archive is like a really great place to start, but also expect some more like dedicated onboarding materials for basically some of the specific tools that relate to like how core teams are going to structure themselves and work within the DAO. So.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Abby, for adding that. That's very key point, and definitely like one of the most important thing in our roadmap. Because yeah, there's a lot out there. As the lead of the DAO tooling workstream, there's far too many. So yeah, we want to make sure that we give everyone the resources so they don't have to do all that extra work and to make onboarding as simple as possible. Cool. Okay. Well, thanks again for adding that. So can everyone see the screen? Maybe an audible yes or no.
I know that the stream is on. I can't see it because I always have to like exit and enter the stream to see the stream.
Oh,
so
okay.
But maybe can anybody else give confirmation that they can see Shelby's screen? Maybe in the chat.
I can see it.
Okay, great. Then
Okay,
I'm
great. Okay, thanks so much, Louis. Okay, yeah, cool. So yeah, this presentation, I wanted to give this presentation today just to kind of share really complicated thinking that we've kind of been doing around changing governance needs. So in the transition to the DAO, it's not only about changing how we organize ourselves. It's also like how we coordinate ourselves, and there's a lot of different layers to that, and that go way beyond just like token governance and voting on proposals. So yeah, the purpose here is just to kind of give again an overview of what these changing governance needs are and what some potential solutions could possibly look like, and also just kind of like a really high level context of certain types of tools that could possibly be used here. Definitely not going to go into any technical details of specific tools, but yeah, just to kind of give a broader general context. And yeah, I would love this. It's like I mentioned, it's kind of like a complex topic, and there's a lot of layers. And also, but please be aware, this is not like a fully convicted complete process. It's there's a lot of questions, as you'll see, still that still need to be answered. So I would love if you think this is interesting, or if you want to discuss this in further detail, I would love to do so. So it's also kind of I'm trying to use it as bait to try to get more folks interested or joining the discussion and the thought process as well behind these governance changes and solutions. So let's see. Okay, so as we all know, for the 1 millionth time, we are currently in a transition to the DAO. And one of the main pieces of that, of course, is handing over funding of core teams and project vision and strategy from the foundation over to the DAO, where the DAO is already kind of taking care of a lot of treasury funded initiatives, including the creation of sub DAOs like grants in the EGF, but also treasury diversification proposals and everything like that. So, but I want to mention this just to make sure that the funding of core teams and project vision and strategy is seen to be coming over to the DAO, because that will be part of that's part of the governance needs that we'll be discussing. So thinking about this transition, some of the governance goals we kind of outlined at the beginning of it, or this year, were to distribute influence and ownership. There's actually 2 other work streams that are focusing in, exactly on this. But yeah, how can we go beyond token governance, or to make sure that the influence and within the project goes beyond the largest token holders, and actually gets into the contributors who are really well aware of the project, and just distributing that in a better way. Fewer dependencies and power pools. Again, just kind of moving away from these larger token holders, or having a lot of power, and technical, political, social resilience and long-term sustainability kind of go hand in hand. But so before we go into how this was meant to be just kind of a reminder of some of our governance goals for this transition. And before we go into discussing the changes, let's do a quick review of the current governance process, or the current token governance process, the types of proposals that have been went through this process, and also the problems with it. So the existing process, token governance, we all know and love. Temperature, there's 4 steps that starts. The temperature check gets a little bit more defined in a discussion, goes to an off-chain snapshot, poll in the formal review stage, and then finally gets voted on-chain in the governance proposal stage. There's a proposal threshold of 1%, participation threshold of 4%. All of this jazz, I think everybody's pretty familiar with it. We also, within this process, have enabled delegation, which is meant to help distribute voting power away from larger token holders to smaller token holders in order to help distribute like decision-making power on proposals. So what kind of proposals have been passed in this process? So to date, these are like the main proposals that have gone through. This is again just like a screenshot from Civil, our Civil page, which is where our on-chain governance is housed. So we have the transition to the DAO, that like one proposal, but like more importantly, we have a few treasury diversification proposals like coming through, and product and protocol changes. There was the one with the setting the name registration fee to 0. And then also another big category is sub-DAO creation and funding. So that speaks to the Radicle grants program and also the ecosystem growth fund. So these are not even all of the types of, like, we've had more proposals come through. These are just the proposals that have made it through the governance process and were executed on chain. So there's even more, like, but most of them fit into these categories that are, there's 4 categories listed here. So, and with the grants in the EGF, when they were created, it also created like new avenues for folks to apply for funding for work in relation to like that's contributing to the development of Radicle. So, like I mentioned before, like DAO-wide token governance, the types of proposals that we talked about were sub-DAO creation funding, treasury diversification, protocol changes, and that uses token governance. In grants, a lot of the proposals are meant to fund technical projects that support the Radicle ecosystem and the broader FOSS and Web3 ecosystem. And the EGF, a lot of the proposals go to funding initiatives that drive awareness, engagement, and adoption. This includes like education and research initiatives, DevRel, all that good stuff. So, and like, if you look under each of these, you'll see like grants, their main like decision-making mechanism is a multi-sig, and EGF is also to decide on what proposals or applications actually get funded. So, problems with this existing setup, a lot of these are pretty obvious and we've discussed before, but token governance is centralized and plurocratic. Voting power of core contributors or people who really understand the project the best, arguably, is underrepresented or missing completely. Meaning like a lot of contributors don't have a lot of voting power or they don't participate at all. Proposals can take a long time to review and often require a specific set of knowledge and or skills to properly assess. This makes it really like demotivating to try to like process and vote on all the proposals. Delegation can help distribute voting power away from large token holders, as I mentioned before, but it also ends up centralizing voting power to a few top delegates. Multi-sigs and sub-DAOs or orgs centralize funding decision-making power to a small group. And token governance is not a realistic or effective way to make the operational decisions needed in a fully decentralized DAO. For example, like having to put every single like smaller decision for different teams or working in the project to token governance would not be a really realistic solution to function. And then also like there's a lack of cross-team incentives to support and influence related work in other sub-DAOs and teams. For example, you could think of like grants, for example, and core development teams. Like there's not really like a clear aligned incentive to have the core development teams like work with grants applications that are usually really directly related to like technical work that's being done on the project. So there's like definitely some crossover there, but there's not enough incentives to kind of help these different projects work together. So some starting questions, like how can we distribute ownership of the project to make token voting less bureaucratic? This has already kind of been started with the Transition Zero proposal that passed a few weeks ago or months ago now to distribute RAD to some of the longer term contributors. But there's still no like long term solution for how that will be done. How can we better distribute influence within the Radicle project? So this is also kind of going back to the example of like core contributors, like people who know arguably the project quite well. How do we better capture and measure reputation for contributors to help determine who we distribute ownership and influence to? And what non-tokenized alternatives, so tools or processes, can we use to supplement or possibly replace token governance in some decision-making areas? And how can we diversify multi-sigs to make them less centralized? This is actually, it was perfect, Boredom, that you mentioned this earlier, because it will be kind of one of the examples I go over. So now that we've kind of like gone over the existing process and the issues with it, just diving into the emerging org design and governance mechanisms that have kind of influenced like this evaluation of like changing governance needs. So if you haven't seen these diagrams yet, I think these are really helpful overviews to kind of think about how the Radicle DAO is and like exists and how it's organized currently. So within the Radicle DAO like ecosystem, there's 4 main orgs, which orgs we're defining as it's like its own it's like an organization with its own governance processes to manage funds, to fund different teams within the project. And then within each org, there's different teams. So core teams representing, and these can be just groups of people doing work for a specific org. On the right-hand side, this kind of gives a different view of what that looks like. So there's like org level teams and individual contributors. And this has like looking at this, it kind of sparks a few questions of like, okay, well, with all of these different decisions that are needing to be made, where, like at what level, or like what part of this this apparatus will different decisions be made, and also how is the other question. So some of the emerging questions more specifically for this are like, what types of proposals will we continue to go through our like existing token governance process? So which ones will continue to happen at like the DAO-wide level? What decisions will be made at the org and team levels? What will governance structures at these org and team levels look like? And what checks and balances need to exist between orgs and teams? How do we keep orgs in check if they start making decisions that teams don't agree with? Or how can just to make sure the balance of power is there as well. How will the different decision-making models within the various teams work with each other, interact with each other? Does there need to maybe be some sort of degree of like similarity in these decision-making models? Keeping in mind we want the teams to maintain a lot of autonomy in how they function. But when it comes to moving outside of the team and having to interact with other teams and with the org and the broader DAO itself, that mechanism probably needs to be a little bit more similar or a little bit more aligned. And then how can we uphold the collective responsibility between these different teams? So this slide kind of goes into like a little bit more specifics of like different types of decisions that we can think about needing to be made at different levels. We've already kind of talked about the DAO-wide ones, but the org level ones, this is, applying for funding from the broader DAO, and budget management, kind of org philosophy, different org operations, and then within the teams, like what kind of decisions will still like need to be made or responsibilities will be in the team level. So this again kind of goes to the part of like, okay, what types of decisions will probably be made where. This is also, again, this is still like, this is an idea. Like this is a concept, and this is kind of like what we've been discussing a lot in this core dev org working group, of like really trying to figure out where these roles and responsibilities belong. But what I've kind of been think about a little bit more is how these decisions will be made. So we can already kind of start doing that even before having these like exact roles defined at these different levels. So one of like kind of the main like processes for this is really discussing the concept of like non-tokenized governance. So just as like a quick refresher, or like a comparison quick. So tokenized governance, as we know and use in our governance process today, is like one token, one vote. So that means the more tokens you have, the more voting power you have. And to use like this process is used to make on-chain decisions, approving proposals directly, that are directly applying for funding from the Radicle Treasury. And this voting power is also represented in off-chain snapshot polls. The reason I mention that is because it can also, we could also use that, for example, as a way to signify other decisions beyond just on proposals. For example, you could use off-chain snapshot polls to decide on other things, like other organizational decisions, for example, at these different levels. And you could use the token value, like your voting power at that level without having to make on-chain executions. But now there's this kind of like new idea or like emerging kind of mechanism that a lot of DAOs are starting to explore, is this like non-tokenized governance. So like, what does that mean? A lot of you might have seen like already the proposals or heard discussions about like Otter Space, kind of using non-transferable soul-bound tokens / badges. And these badges have a few different use cases. You can use it for membership, you can use it for like access, like gated access, and also governance potentially. So, and there's a few different ways you could do that. So all the badges, for example, could have equal voting power, equal voting value, or could be weighted based on role, contributions, many different things, a variety of different things. This would have to be something that would need to be discussed and decided on. And also could be used potentially for like obviously off-chain decisions. You could use it as just like, if you have this token, you can vote on this, and this is just how we make decisions within our team or org, etc. Or these badges could also potentially, the outcome of those votes could potentially be used for on-chain outcomes as well. So let's use an example, or look at an example. So let's zoom in a little bit to one of the orgs. This is the core development org, which will be the entity that is replacing the foundation, the foundation council, to coordinate Radicle's core development. And the teams that focus on that. So if we look at this mechanism, or we look at these different like levels, we can ask ourselves what type of governance mechanisms, either on or off chain, or token versus non-token, could or need to exist at each of those levels. So let's like look at an on-chain example. So applying for funding, orgs. So how would this work in this mechanism? Orgs apply for funding for their org from the broader DAO. So this is like the traditional proposal, like going through the governance process, the token governance process, and getting approval from the broader token holder community. The next level, so teams would then apply for funding from the orgs directly, rather than having to apply each individually to the broader DAO. So teams are applying, orgs apply to the DAO, teams apply to orgs. And those decisions are maybe made based like on the multi-sig of the org committee, whatever potentially, and then contributors get paid from the teams. So that's like an on-chain pretty simple example of flow of like how that would move, that decision would move through this process. Now I guess like as an alternative, we can look at like more off-chain or badge-based example of how voting can work. And we could let's take the example of on or offboarding a team. So again, this could be completely dependent on the org multi-sig, like the org multi-sig, whoever is on that, like the org committee could just vote and whoever is on the committee decides if a new team is onboarded or not, or offboarded. Or, for example, you could have the org host like an org-wide vote to either on or offboard a team. Contributors from all teams within that org holding the appropriate badge could participate in the vote. And depending on that outcome of the vote, you could either have it, I think in the example Borden was giving for grants, like you could have that be the outcome of that off-chain badge vote be used as a signal to the multi-sig committee to help inform a decision. Or you could even have it trigger an on-chain action to onboard or offboard a team. And this would require tools such as like a Zodiac reality module. So this is a kind of just like a crash course example trying to explain how these could potentially be used. And this is just like one type of decision. There's a million different types of decisions that will need to be made within these different mechanisms. But I just wanted to try to clearly explain that. So yeah, and this is more of just again kind of trying to address the issue of like how can we diversify like these multi-sigs, because again they are still like pretty centralized holders of power in these sub DAOs in any case. So there's a few different ways people talk about this. Like you can also have like rotating committee seats on multi-sig. You could also include like the community vote as a seat in the multi-sig. But then like if we look at badges, as I've mentioned already before, the badges could be used to show signal of like how a community, like our contributors are feeling about a certain decision. That could then be taken into consideration by the committee, or it could trigger an on-chain action like I just explained. So it's I think this is super cool. Like I think this opens up so many possibilities to try to like include so many different opinions on a lot of like really important decisions, and really does like opens up like a huge door to ways we could think about decentralizing different decisions in various aspects of the project. So yeah, this again was super complex. So I apologize and if anything was like not clear, and would love to hear questions. But if you're looking to like get more involved in this kind of stuff, obviously you can always reach out to me. I'm always happy to chat. But there are other ways you can get involved. You can join like bi-weekly OtterSpace calls, for example. So OtterSpace has kind of been the main project we've been working with and talking to about using these kind of like non-tokenized like badges as like a voting mechanism, or like using it as a mechanism for various things, governance being one of them. You can join the Core Dev Org working group. We meet every week. It's super fun, exciting stuff, and a lot of my thought process has been like triggered by a lot of discussions we've had there actually. And then join DAO tooling demos. As I mentioned, there's one next Friday on the 18th for HATS protocol. You can join me in the DAO tooling research, search and brainstorming of new tools or potential combinations of tools that we could put together to figure out different like decision-making mechanisms for the DAO. And then also I guess like an open question, like how else would you want to get involved? Like if I'd be really open and excited to hear any suggestions or requests on how you could get more involved in thinking about this. If you have a better way of thinking about this or trying to like document it, because documenting it is really hard. I'd be super, super psyched to hear about it. And that's it. Thanks.
Nice. Thank you, Shelby. That's so much information, but I think it's like such a great overview of all the I think it's like really contextualizes like how governance is changing and basically why should we care. I think it's so easy to kind of get like really in the weeds with this transition, but a lot of this stuff is being done to try to create like a better and more healthy environment for governance as a whole, and experimenting with some of these concepts like non-financialized governance is a really exciting design space. And so while it can seem like a ton of information, the goal here is to just start kind of bringing everybody like along the way, and so we can share our thinking so that when we start experimenting, we can kind of start doing it more intentionally. And so I think that Shelby's overview is definitely like the latest on like where our head is at, and I think the goal is to try to get as many people's like thoughts and kind of not just like feedback, but participation in this governance evolution as well. So it might be a lot to digest now, but as Shelby said, like I would love to hear if anybody has any specific questions that they'd want to dive into in the last like 5 minutes, or any comments that they'd like to share as well while we're kind of all here. Is there anything that anybody want to chime in here?
It's a lot, and this is and like I said, it's really hard to like write it all down because it's so complex. But I'll continue trying to like improve this version and think of other ways to maybe try to like lay it out in writing so we can have more informed and textualized discussions about this, because it is super important. And it's like I said, it's not really a decision that can be made by like a group or a few people. It's like a decision-making process that will be used throughout the entire DAO. So it's really important that we get a lot of feedback and like try to have like deeper discussions on like how we think these processes could be or should be developed.
Hey, Shelby, thank you for doing this. Where did you, just to be clear, where did you post the link to this a set of slides in a certain channel?
I have not posted it yet, but I can if it would be helpful to people.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to take like just a closer look and digest it a bit better.
Absolutely, I'll share it. At least for sure in the call notes as well, and I can send it to you directly as well.
Super, thank you.
I see Nassar is here. We have like 4 minutes left on the call, but I don't know if you wanted to maybe quickly give your update. We skipped over you earlier.
Sure, apologies, I had another meeting, but yeah, I guess I could just give a quick kind of overview, but before that, just say, thanks for sharing all that. That's it seems like it's progressed a lot from, I guess, a lot of the previous conversations we've had and things you've shown. So excited about that. On kind of my side, we're currently going through a process of doing a retrospective on the EGF. Now the initial 6 months of the program are over. It's kind of at the stage where it's kind of a mix of a lot of the different core growth teams kind of overlap with the work that's happening in the EGF, and as we're looking at this kind of restructuring of the orgs, I think we've been exploring the best way forward for the EGF, and at the moment the way we're thinking about it is this idea of rather than continuing running the EGF as it is, which is kind of this fund that kind of operates across growth teams, try and push have more of those roles played within the individual growth teams, the 4 growth teams being community, growth-related teams being community, marketing, education, and partnerships, and looking at a way of restructuring that, and that's kind of the conversation that's being had both with the core, with the org design team, and with the core organ mind, and then looking at next steps, which is potentially focusing our efforts down into the education side and building, doing a proposal for another sub-DAO that will be called like Radicle Institute and focus on all of the education initiatives that we want to do within the Radicle ecosystem there. So that's kind of high level where we're at, aiming to get kind of those updates and proposals done this month and out, but also now I guess we're working with the org design team to kind of to coordinate that. But yeah, that's high level what we're working on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nasser, for giving a quick update there. I think I'm really looking forward to having or hearing more about your process here and thinking about this development of like a Radicle Institute. I think is such a cool idea, and a great opportunity for not only Radicle but like for the broader ecosystem to get involved. So yeah, Abby, I don't know if you had anything.
No, I think that we've been chatting about kind of like next steps here, and I gave you this feedback personally. I think that we can post that retrospective sooner, and then as work with the org design team to start figuring out like what the actual proposal would look like for the sub-DAO, similar to like RGP, and kind of like align the timelines there. So I'm excited for that retrospective to hit the forum. I think a lot of people will be really interested in learning more about how the EGF went over this kind of first like 6-month season, if you will, similar to how Boredom kind of just reflected on season 1 of grants. And so I think it would be really great to figure out what learnings we can pull from these first DAO funded experiments, and how we can use these learnings to kind of better inform the work that we're doing with the transition and the org design. So thanks for the update. And then I'm excited to kind of chime in on the forum when we have those proposals. But cool. So it looks like we're kind of at the hour. That was a very lots of information. Shelby, thanks so much again for that presentation. It'd be super cool if we can share those slides, maybe in the DAO tooling channel or kind of in our Notion somewhere. So I think that we'll end here now. I do want to say that we might be restructuring the governance calls in the future. We're trying to figure out what's the best way to communicate information to our community, especially in this transition. So we might be seeing some like structural changes to how we operate these calls. But as always, Shelby will take the recording and put it up on YouTube so people can refer to what we chatted about today. And keep an eye out on the forum where we're going to be sharing some more in-depth and broader updates on kind of how the transition has been going, and hopefully starting to share more discrete timelines about where we're going next as well. So thank you everybody for taking the time. Really appreciate you tuning in. And as always, you can reach us on Discord in the governance one of the many governance channels, so feel free to ask any questions there to me or Shelby directly as well. So yeah, cool. We'll end it there. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.